In this tutorial, we will have a look how we can use scriptable object to give uh, power-ups to our player game object. As you can see, we moving so much slowly, but once we collect these power-ups or this trigger with this game object, as you can see, our player speed in running just gets rising. Basically it's get too much faster, as you can see. So we will use scriptable object to give ability to our player game object, and I'm click on assets, create C# script, name it to something like ability or power ups. I already have created right over here, so I'm gonna open that up. So let's double click that to open this up. And we will use scriptable objects. Basically scriptable objects are container. We can that basically scriptable objects gonna hold values, names, whatever we want. It's work like as a container. So what we want, instead of deriving from mono behavior, this object or this script, sorry, this script not gonna sit on an object. So that's why we can remove this mono behavior. Basically we're gonna remove this mono behavior. Instead we're gonna use this scriptable scriptable objects. Basically we want to create, and let's remove this start and update function. We don't need this. We want to create this object. If we move to Unity, then project tab, assets, something right over here in assets folder, we want to create that object. So that's why we just deriving from scriptable object, and this gonna hold values, anything you want to keep. So first thing, I'm gonna give the name of the ability or the power-ups. Let's create a public string that will be name, and I'm gonna call this one name. And if it's became underlined, some says ability, you can see an underline, because we already use a variable name, already we use that. So that's why we getting a little bit error. So what we have to do, we just have to put a new, and it's gonna get off that error. Or what else you can do, you can name it something like ability name. It's totally up to you what you want. And this container or this scriptable game object gonna hold two power ups. So firstly it gonna hold the jump height, and the second thing, the speed. So let's create a public float. Make sure you just making this public because I want to assign it through inspector, so that's why. And the float, this will be jump height or jump height, you can call. And let's create another, and that will be our speed. So float speed, speed, and you can give any value equal to it if you like, but I'm gonna leave with that because I want to create this object through inspector. And we want to create that, sorry, non-inspector, we want to create that. If we just move to project tab, then assets, we want to create right over here. So we need to define an path to create right over here. If we just right click on it, then create, we're not able to see that object right over here. As you can see, to see that, we need to go to script one more time. And before we create the class, in top of our class, over here, we need to make this square brackets, and we have to type this create asset menu, and it's gonna create the menu. And into brackets you have to assign the file name, as you can see, string, and the menu name. So file name, so make sure file name equal to, and string you can pass something like, I'm gonna call, uh, let's call scriptable object, scriptable object. And the menu name, comma, over here you have to type comma, and I'm gonna type the menu name in quotation we have to do. So I'm gonna copy this line of code, control C, and let's paste it over here. So scriptable objects, and we have to type this slash because we want to go one more subfolder, or one more basically one more subfolder, you can say, not folder, is basically the path. and we can call this one something like power ups, or we can call something like ability. So I'm going to call power ups and control C now. And I'm going to remove these two namespaces in the top, we don't need it, and control S to save your code. And let's go to Unity. Now we can create that object or that scriptable object in our assets. How? We need to just right click on assets, and we're gonna see and define path which is scriptable object, and we also created a sub path which is the power ups. To do so, let's go to project tab, then right click on assets, create. As you can see, scriptable object. So let's go there, and we created a subpath which is power ups, as you can see. So just click on that, and it's gonna create the scriptable object right away. And I'm gonna call this something like ability. It's totally up to you what you want to call. And let's select that ability, go over to inspector. As you can see, we can name the power ups or the ability, and I'm gonna name this something like ability or speed. It's totally up to you. Instead, I'm gonna call this power ups, power power ups. Okay. And jump height, we can define it over here. Before you define, make sure you just go to player game object, and I have it over here. So by default jump height is 15, so I'm gonna set a list number something like 4. And run speed, I'm gonna set a little bit less, something like let's do 3. So once we trigger with any game object something right over here, I just created a test object. So what you can do, you can just go to hierarchy, right click, then 2D object sprite, and then select this circle, and make sure you just select that circle and just go over to inspector, click on add component, and add a circle collider 2D. And make sure you just check this box is triggered to true. Basically check that, and assign that this circle with some certain tag. To do so, let's go to inspector one more time and tag, and it says untag. So just click on that and click on add tag and hit this plus icon and aim it to something like trigger or anything you can call. So I already have created a game object right over here, and I assigned it this trigger game object as a trigger tag. And I also added a collider, as you can see right over here. And make sure you just check the box is trigger, because we're gonna you use on trigger enter 2D function in our player script. So that's why. So I'm gonna remove this one instead. And let's now we just shrink down our player speed, so we're gonna move a little bit low. But once we trigger with this game object or collect this one, this power ups, then we will increase the speed right away. So if we select this ability from that assets folder now, so for the jump height, I'm gonna set now 15, a little bit larger number than normally we just jumping on the platform. And the speed, I'm gonna do something like 10, so we're gonna move little bit faster. So what we have to do right now, let's select this player game object. Basically we need a reference of this ability, then we can extract the value we want, something like this jump height we can set, then speed and this speed, anything like that. So let's go to our player script, and let's double click that to open it up in Visual Studio. And we need a reference of this ability game object. If we go to project tab, then assets, we have the ability right over here. So we need a reference of this ability game object, this scriptable game object. Then we can just set this value, we can extract the value which is jump height and the speed as well. So let's go there, and I'm gonna create right over here. So make sure you're just making it public so we can see. And the thing is that scriptable name is ability, and we have to name the container, sorry, we can call something like ability. And make sure you just close that up with semicolon, control S to save your code. Now let's go to Unity. So we should able to see an empty field in underneath our player script just gonna appear says ability. So what we can do, we can drag this game object right there, this scriptable game object. So let's select this player, and as you can say ability, and it says none, basically empty. So what we have to do, we're gonna select this ability and drag it right there, and now we have a reference of this ability. Now we can extract the info, which is jump height and the speed as well, and the name of the this ability is power ups we name it, but it's totally up to you what you want to call. And let's go to script now, and I'm gonna go to down over here. I'm gonna use this on trigger enter 2D function, 2D function, and we do know that this function get called when we trigger with something. So if we trigger with something this power, and I assign it this game object or this trigger as a trigger tag, so we definitely gonna trigger with this game object. And I added up a box collider, and I said that is triggered to true, basically checked. Make sure you just do that. So we're gonna trigger with this power tag. So we do know that this function get called when we trigger with something, and we're gonna check right over here if collision dot game object dot tag, if it's equals to trigger. If that is the case, then make some curly brackets. So what we are doing right over here, do we do know that this function get called when we trigger with something. So we definitely gonna trigger with this trigger or this object or game object you can say, and we assign it this game object as a trigger tag, as you can see in the inspector. So we definitely gonna trigger with this, and we checking right over here if we trigger with that whatever we trigger it with, we going to that game object and accessing the tag, and we checking if that tag is equals to trigger. Basically we checking if we trigger with this game object, and we accessing the tag of this game object which is trigger, and we checking if this trigger is equals to trigger. And that means basically if we're gonna trigger with this trigger with this game object. So what we want, firstly we want to destroy that game object right away. To destroy, we're gonna use this destroy function, and destroy function will take the game object you want to destroy. So we're gonna do destroy collision dot game object, basically the game object we trigger it with, which is the trigger or the that game object. And after that, before we destroy, we want to ups the power. So by default we set player speed, this run speed, by default we set in the inspector. If we select this player game object, as you can see 3, as you can see 3. But in if we go to project tab, then ability, we set the speed 10, as you can see. So the 10 is will be little bit faster, so that's why I'm gonna go right there. So before we destroy, I'm gonna set the speed. So run speed equal to ability dot speed, ability dot speed. Now once we trigger with this game object, the speed gonna be of this player game object will be 10. Why? Because as you can see, we setting the run speed. So if we go right, as you can see, this run speed by default is 3, but once we trigger with that game object, then we going over to that ability scriptable object, then accessing the speed. And by default we set, or in inspector we set 15, we know. Basically we just going over to this ability scriptable game object, then accessing the speed, which is 10, as you can see. So that's why this right over here gonna be 10. So the run speed gonna be right over here 10 once we trigger. And normally we just moving with 3, but once we trigger or collect this game object, then our speed just gonna be right away little bit faster, which will be 10. So let's have a look. And you also can just make the jump height a little bit high if you want, but I'm not gonna do that. It's totally up to you where you want to do that, but I'm not gonna do that. So I just only want to speed up our player game object. So make sure you just press down Ctrl S to save your code. And now let's go to Unity. We should able to see that once we trigger with this trigger game object or this game object, we gonna collect, then our speed gonna be right away 10. And by default we set, as you can see, 3, but in ability we set it 10. So this run speed just gonna be 10 right away once we trigger. So let's have a look. Let's click on this play button in the top and have a look on that. and you can give multiple ability to that ability scriptable game object. It's totally up to you. As you can see, we moving little bit slowly, or too much slowly, or with this much speed. But once we trigger or collect this one, as you can see, our speed get a little bit faster. Basically this run speed, as you can see, became 10. Why? Because in this ability we just give 10, as you can see. And you also can increase the height, but I'm not gonna do that. You, what you have to do, so I'm gonna get out of play mode. You just have to go to the script and you can say, so our jump height, if we go move to by default we set this in inspector. If we select this player game object 4, so you can set this jump height in the bottom. Jump height equal to ability, sorry, ability dot jump height, which by default we set 15. So this jump height, as normally we doing with 4, but in ability dot jump height is 15. So that's why this jump height gonna be 15 right away once we trigger. But I'm not gonna do that. It's totally up to you where you want to do. So that's why I hope you get the idea of this, how you can just use scriptable objects to make some power-ups and to give player game objects as some abilities.